and which are now lost.
Gusty winds fanned the flames, houses in their path destroyed, and residents urged to abandon property.
All of a sudden the police just came along and said, please move along now, like the fire has jumped with the wind, and everyone had to leave.
During daylight, the fire is being fought from the air, as well as from land. But it's been overnight, when helicopters can't fly, that the flames have been at their most destructive.
It's horrendous conditions. We knew it was going to be difficult to control these sort of fires overnight. We don't have the aerial support, but the ground crews get in there and do their best to protect properties and hold it.
While winds remain strong, the flames have the upper hand, homeowners doing what they can to stop their progress. These fires come 2 years to the day after Black Saturday, the worst bushfires in Australian history that killed over 150 people. So far, property the main victim this time around. Andrew Thomas, Al Jazeera, Sydney.
Well, our weather forecaster Everton Fox is here to tell us more about the situation in Australia. First it was what, floods and cyclone, now fires. When are they going to get a break, poor Australia?
I know, it's terrible, isn't it, Foley? It's one of those situations where you could do with that heavy rain in the north, meeting up with the very dry weather that we have in the south. Unfortunately, that is not going to be the case. We will see the winds easing down over the next couple of days, but for the time being, it will stay largely dry just around Queensland. Eventually, though, the high pressure causing those strong winds will slowly move away. Well, you can see from our satellite picture how we still have that cloud across northernmost parts. That's still producing copious amounts of rainfall, but we need it down towards the southwest. There is a little bit of cloud around here, tantalisingly close to Perth. It does stay to the south of Perth. Having said that, though, at the moment what we do have is our old area of low pressure, our old tropical cyclone making its way across northern parts of Australia, and then we've got this big area of high pressure in the Bight, where the two interact. That's where we get those very strong winds, which will gradually ease as we make our way through the second half of the week. You see how it turns a little more flabby and just pushes its way a little further eastwards. And that rain, again, still close by, but not making its way to the north and east of Perth, where we do have the very heavy rain. We need the very heavy rain, I should say. We already have very heavy rain affecting a good part of Sri Lanka. That stays very disturbed here over the next few days. Much of South Asia, on the other hand, will stay dry, and it will stay sunny. Dry and sunny too across a good part of northern Africa. It's set fair across a good part of the Mediterranean to central areas of Europe. We have got some snow coming into eastern parts of Europe, but it's mild. -1 Celsius in Moscow is well above the seasonal average. Meanwhile, over towards the west, it's wet and windy, but again, it's mild.
Thank you, Everton. Security forces are on a heightened state of alert in Bangladesh. We'll have the latest on a general strike which is paralysing much of the country. And also the latest from the hearing into the killing of former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri. Stay with us. We're back after this short break.
It's the right ingredients and just the right amount. It's 729 layers and several well-spent hours. It's when 1 degree too high is too high. 1 minute too long is just too long. And then you remember, this is just the appetizer. A 5-star menu on board Qatar Airways. Qatar Airways, world's 5-star airline.
A popular uprising that shook the country to its core. A defiant president under siege from his people. As the protesters took charge of the streets, we look back at the events that are changing Egypt.
I will stay on the air if I can until the police come.
In a special program, Al Jazeera gives you a day-by-day account from those that witnessed them firsthand. Egypt burning, at this time on Al Jazeera.
Welcome back. A reminder of our main story on Al Jazeera. Thousands of protesters are still on the streets of Cairo and other Egyptian cities this Monday, calling for the end of Hosni Mubarak's reign. Egyptian TV has shown the president meeting members of his administration. His new cabinet has held its first full meeting since the beginning of the uprising. Let's now speak to Al Jazeera's Andrew Simmons, who is live for us in Cairo. Andrew, we saw pictures there of President Mubarak, the first pictures since his last speech last week. He's looking very much unfazed there.
Yes, most certainly. It does appear that all the indications are now that something is in place. The US has supported this idea that Mubarak stays there as a figurehead and right the way through until elections. And it appears that there is a movement now within the regime to back that up with actions, back that up with changes. Now, many of the protesters say that this is window dressing. They are still absolutely determined to occupy Liberation Square, and it is continuing. There is a resolve there, but that is under massive test now. It's growing and growing. We're entering a third week in this whole process, and the question is now, will that resolve last? Because normality, or the semblance of normality, is returning for a second straight day. The banks have opened only for 3.5 hours. People are returning to work, and we've had reports that in some businesses are introducing policies of trying to get their people back to work almost by force. One report that an employee was told that unless he actually stayed at work, if he failed to appear at work for 3 days in a row, he'd be fired. So this is the sort of backdrop we've got now. The issue is the Constitution. Hillary Clinton has made it clear that the US sees the situation quite plainly, that if Mubarak stood down now, there would be a vacuum, and the Constitution has to be addressed before there is any standing down of Mubarak.
Certainly, analysts have said that the Constitution is set up in such a way that it's almost impossible to change it without Mubarak's consent. Where does this now leave, then, the talks which began yesterday between some opposition groups, including the Muslim Brotherhood and the government? Was that just a one-time thing, or are we expecting to see more talks?
No. No, Vice President Omar Suleiman has said that the committee has been set up to actually look at the Constitution, to examine it, to actually change it. And there is some tacit support for that idea, although it has to be said that the Muslim Brotherhood, who, let's face it, this is a colossal thing that the Muslim Brotherhood have been engaged in this meeting. They say they're not negotiating, but they are looking at the situation very seriously. And this hasn't happened. It's a banned organization. You know, there hasn't been a meeting since 1954 of the two sides. So that is something that's underway. It's too premature to say that this is a going thing, but there are signs that there's some direction that way. Of course, I come back to the point that as far as many of the protesters, particularly the younger ones, are concerned, they insist that this is window dressing. They don't trust it. It's an issue of trust, a massive issue of trust.
Well, certainly the protesters, haven't trusted Mubarak in 30 years, so they're likely not to do so now. And as you say, the question being, where is this all going to go? I mean, is this really a revolution in the true sense of the term, or are these just protests? I mean, how long is this limbo situation going to be lasting?
You'd be a very brave person to actually predict how long this is going to last, because really you have now a situation where it's almost a siege, really, bit by bit, yard by yard. The army is trying to enclose the square, and the protesters are resisting that. Now, it's almost like a tented city now. You can see awnings going up. The protesters are they're intent on staying there for keeps, but you've got to now look at the rest of the capital, for example. Let's looking at the capital alone, 18 million people, and many, particularly the lower middle classes, support the protests, but see concessions being made, and so they're sort of going for, to some extent, for what the regime is portraying, which there is movement, there is momentum there, challenging momentum in the square, and of course the government is intent on diluting this extraordinary protest in favour of democracy, diluting it into nothing really, and then getting back to normal. And many Egyptians want to get back to normal, and they feel that there is movement. So you really have a position here right now where it is a waiting game.
Right.
It could be a very long one.
And of course, we are watching it very carefully and closely here on Al Jazeera. Andrew Simmons in Cairo, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, let's take a look at how things have developed over the last 2 weeks in Egypt. Inspired by the uprising in Tunisia, anti-government protesters took to the streets in large numbers, calling it a day of rage. Demonstrations spread across the country. On day 4, President